My parasitic daughter-in-law thought I was blind. She actually had the audacity to rip my deceased wife's memorial off the wall and throw it in the trash. All weekend, Kim was acting like a thief in the night, glancing over her shoulder, checking my every move. The second my son and I stepped onto the back deck, she slipped inside cabin 1. 10 minutes later, she walked out, smooth as water, fake smiling and asking if anyone wanted sweet tea. But when I walked inside, my blood ran cold. My late wife Patsy's cross-stitch was gone. This monster had ripped it down and stuffed it face down in a dusty cardboard box in the storage closet, treating my wife's memory like garbage. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I rehung the frame, pulled up a chair, and sat there in the shadows, waiting. When she walked back in and caught my eyes, her face completely emptied of color. That was the exact moment her worst nightmare began. Welcome to Vanta Revenge. If you love stories about quiet people finally breaking their silence and crushing toxic family members, subscribe right now. My name is Dale Coffman, and I'm about to tell you how my son's wife's family tried to stolen what's mine, and how I made them pay tenfold. I stayed in that chair until the light in the room shifted. Kim left first, didn't say much. Travis followed her out, and I let him. There was nothing to say at that moment that needed saying out loud. Here's what I want you to understand, though, and this is important if you're going to stay with me through this whole thing. That scene in cabin 1, the chair, the wall, the look on her face, that was not the story. That was just the end of it, the part you needed to see up front so you'd know what was coming. Because what I'm about to tell you starts a long time before Kim Holloway ever set foot on Yocana Creek. It starts with 34 years of work, and a woman who could read a balance sheet the way I read wire, and who spent the last 2 years of her life building something for people she would never get to meet. You cannot understand what Kim took off that wall without knowing who put it there. And you cannot understand how I was ready, how I had been ready for months before that weekend without knowing what it cost to build the thing they thought was theirs. So let me go back to where this actually starts. 34 years. That's how long I worked for the same electrical company in Lafayette, Georgia. Started at 23 as a journeyman apprentice, made foreman at 31, ran commercial and residential jobs across Walker, Dade, and Chattooga counties for 3 decades after that. I pulled wire through walls in July heat that hit 107 in an attic. I worked January nights when the caulk along the south side of every house cracked before we could finish the seal. I have been up ladders I didn't like. The look of, in crawl spaces that smelled like things I didn't want to identify, in panels that hadn't been touched since 1978 and had no business existing the way they existed. I am not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you so you understand what 34 years actually looks like. It looks like a man who owns a paid-off house on Mill Road and 3 cabins on Yocana Creek. That's it. That's the math. I met Patsy in 1991 at a church social in Chickamauga. She was 24. She was the kind of woman who laughed at things other people thought weren't funny, and she was right about all of them. We got married in September 1992. Travis came along in 1993. I put Travis through 2 years at Coosa Valley Technical College and a commercial HVAC certification program. He has a good job in Chattanooga now. I'm proud of him for that. Patsy was a bookkeeper for a feed and seed supply company for 23 years. She knew numbers the way I knew wire, not because someone taught her to be careful, but because she genuinely understood what they meant. She kept our books. She kept our savings. She was the one who said, back in 2018, that we had enough equity in the Mill Road house and enough set aside in savings that if we wanted to do something with that 10 acres along the creek road, we could actually do it. The 10 acres on Yocana Creek had belonged to Patsy's family. Her uncle had bought it in 1967, logged the pine timber off most of it, let the rest go to second growth. When he died in 2014, it came to Patsy and 2 cousins. The cousins bought her out for $24,000 in 2016. Patsy put the money into a separate account she kept for what she called the quiet plan. She meant, when retirement was close enough to touch, she and I were going to find a piece of land near water and build something to rent out to people who needed a reason to sit still for a few days. When the 10 acres came available again in 2018, one of the cousins had let his portion go to taxes, and Patsy's other cousin called to offer first right of purchase. Patsy and I drove out to look at it on a Saturday in October, leaves already showing. We stood at the edge of the creek where the limestone flattens out into wide shelves that the water moves over in long sheets. The sound it makes there is different than you expect. It doesn't roar or rush. It just moves. Constant. Even. Like something that has been doing this work its entire life and sees no particular reason to stop. Patsy said, This is it, I said. The road access is rough. She said, we'll put in a gravel drive. We bought it in January 2019. $87,000 for 11 acres and 300 feet of creek frontage. I knew when I signed that the money was correct because Patsy had calculated it 4 ways. I started building in the spring. 3 small cabins, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a covered porch, a small kitchen. Nothing extravagant, not for show, for rest. I framed the structures. I did all the electrical myself, which saved us roughly $23,000 based on what commercial subcontractors were charging that year. I ran the plumbing rough-in and hired a plumber for the finish work. I built the dock over the creek on evenings and weekends through the summer. The bench at the end of it, white oak, 6 feet long, hand-pegged joints. Patsy and I built together on a Saturday in August 2020. She sanded it, while I drilled. She was the one who decided to leave it unpainted. She said the color it would turn in a year was better than anything you could buy at Sherwin-Williams. She was right about that too. Patsy was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in September 2020, stage 3. I will not spend much time on the next 2 years here because they belong to Patsy and to our life together, and not to any story about Roger Holloway. What I will tell you is this. She worked on those cabins until she couldn't. She helped me hang drywall in cabin 2 on a Saturday in February 2021, wearing a fleece jacket over her flannel because the propane heaters weren't keeping up. She designed the kitchen layout for cabin 3, sitting at the kitchen table at Mill Road with graph paper and a mechanical pencil. The cheerful stubbornness of a woman who had been told her time was limited and had decided to use it doing things that mattered to her. She picked every interior detail. The paint color for the walls, a warm gray that she said looked like creekstone in the morning. The cabinet pulls. The guest towel color. She had strong opinions about guest towel color. She said if you were going to give someone a place to rest, the least you could do was make the bathroom feel intentional. I told her I wouldn't have thought of that in 100 years. She said that's why she was here. There was a Saturday in June 2021 when she came out to the property, and I hadn't told her the dock was done. I had finished it the week before and hadn't said anything because I wanted her to see it all at once. We drove out on a Saturday morning, and I walked her down the path through the second growth timber to where it opens at the creek. She saw the dock and she stopped walking. She stood there for a moment, and then she laughed, the real one, the one I'd been married to for 30 years. She said, "Dale, you outdid yourself." I said, "We outdid ourselves." She walked out to the end of the dock and stood there for a long time looking at the creek, the sound of it coming up through the planking under her feet. She said, "This is going to matter to people." She didn't mean it as a compliment, to me specifically. She meant the place itself. She had a way of talking about places like they had intentions of their own. The cross-stitch she made while she was in treatment, white cotton, pine frame, red thread, her own handwriting pattern, a quiet creek on a summer morning, is worth more than everything else. She finished it in March 2022, 8 months before she died. I hung it in cabin 1 the weekend I finished the interior walls. She asked me where I was going to put it. I said, "Where does the first light hit in the morning?" She pointed to the east wall above the kitchen table. I put it there. Patsy died on the 14th of November 2022. She was 55 years old. I opened Coffman Creek Cabins for bookings in March 2023, 6 months after she passed. I booked 17 weekends in the first 3 months. Average stay, $285 a night. Peak season, $340. Memorial Day weekend, I had all 3 cabins booked Friday through Monday, 12 guests total, 3 separate parties, each one of them who had found the listing and decided Yocana Creek was where they wanted to be. That's where the story actually starts. Memory object first appearance, Patsy's cross-stitch on the wall of cabin 1, where the morning light hits the east wall above the kitchen table. Travis is my son and I love him without reservation. I want to say that clearly, before I say anything else, because this story could sound like a verdict on him, and I am not the right person to render that verdict. He is 31 years old. He made choices that cost both of us, and he is working his way through understanding that. I believe him when he says he's working on it. That is the most I can say, honestly right now, and it's more than nothing. Travis met Kimberly Holloway in 2021 at a gym in Chattanooga. She ran fitness classes 3 mornings a week and had 12,000 social media followers who watched her talk about clean eating and mindful movement. She is not a bad person. I want to be clear about that too. She is a young woman who grew up in a family where sharing was assumed and contribution was expected to go in one direction, and she never had a reason to examine whether that was fair to the people on the other end of it. She and Travis were married in June 2022, 5 months before Patsy died. Patsy came to the wedding in a wheelchair. She danced one song with Travis, holding her up. I have that video. I don't watch it often. Kim's father is Roger Holloway. He is 59 years old, retired from a district manager position at a regional insurance company, and has the absolute certainty of a man who has been the loudest voice in every room for 30 years and never been made to reconsider why. He is not cruel. That is important to understand. He is a man who genuinely believes he is being generous when he talks about what belongs to the family. He does not distinguish between what he has contributed and what is available to him by proximity. Roger came to see the cabins for the first time in September 2023, 6 months after I opened them. He drove up from Dalton with his wife Carol and stood at the edge of the creek with his hands on his hips and said, "Dale, this is something else. This is a real operation." I thanked him. He walked the whole property. He tested the deck railings. He went into each cabin and came back with specific comments about the lighting in the bathrooms and whether the kitchen appliances were commercial grade. He picked up a stone from the creek and turned it over like he was appraising it. He asked how the booking numbers were looking, which I answered in general terms. He asked about the mortgage, which I did not answer at all. He moved past that, the way confident men move past things that didn't give them the answer they were looking for. He stood on the dock and looked at the water for a long time. He said something about the light and the sound, the way people say things about nature when they're really thinking about something else. Then he turned and looked at the cabins, the sight lines from the dock, the way the cabins sat back into the tree line, and I watched him calculating something. Not the way Patsy calculated things, which was careful and specific. The way a man calculates when he's deciding what role to give himself in a story. Then he looked back at me and said, "You ought to block out a few weeks, a year for family. Let people come and just enjoy it." I said we'd figure something out. He said, "Travis tells me the shoulder seasons don't book as heavy. October, early March, that's your family time right there." I noticed he said your family time while meaning time available to his family. I let it go because Patsy had been gone less than a year and I was still in the phase of managing small things, so the bigger things didn't overwhelm me. Roger's wife Carol was kinder about it. She said the cross-stitch in cabin 1 was beautiful and asked who made it. I told her. She looked at it for a long moment and said she had good taste. That was all, simple and true. I appreciated that. What I did not know that September afternoon was that Roger had already mentioned the Coffman Creek cabins to 3 colleagues at his former insurance office. He had described them, according to those colleagues, this came out later, as a property the family put together on the Yocana Creek. He had implied, without quite saying, that he had been part of putting it together. I found that out in January of the following year. By then, he had also told a neighbor in Dalton that he had invested in a creek property in Walker County. He had told his pastor that the family had a place near Cloudland Canyon they were developing for rentals. He had said these things the way a man says things he has decided are true because he's told the story enough times that the details have stopped feeling worth questioning. None of this was malicious, in the way a deliberate lie is malicious. Roger genuinely believed that because his daughter had married into a family with this property, the property was in some important sense attached to his family. Now, he had not done the math on what that meant for the man who had actually spent 3 years and $64,000 of his own money building it. That was Roger's particular failure of imagination. It was also his failure of respect. I am not sure which one cost more. It did not improve things. The first unauthorized use of the cabins happened in April 2023, 7 weeks after I opened them for bookings. Travis and Kim asked by text, on a Tuesday, for that weekend, whether they could bring Kim's sister and her boyfriend for what Kim called a trial run to test the guest experience. She said she wanted to make sure everything was working right before they recommended it to anyone. I didn't love the framing, but I said yes because Travis was my son and because I was still learning where the lines needed to be. They showed up Friday afternoon with Kim's sister, her boyfriend, Roger and Carol, and Kim's aunt, who had driven from Rome, Georgia. 6 people. I had not been told about Roger and Carol or the aunt. I found out when Kim sent me a text Saturday morning saying she hoped I didn't mind that her parents had ended up coming. She made it sound like a pleasant surprise. One of the kayaks was damaged when I went back to assess the property Monday. A metal bracket on the dock railing had been bent outward, probably from someone sitting on it. Kim's boyfriend had left a pair of work boots on the cabin porch that I found 3 weeks later when the next paying guests asked about the smell. I called Travis. He said he was sorry about the kayak. He said he'd cover the repair cost. He did. I give him that. But he never mentioned Roger and Carol. He talked around them like they hadn't been there. That was the pattern beginning. Over the following year, from spring 2023 through spring 2024, here is what happened in sequence. Roger called me twice to ask about opening up the calendar for family. Both times I told him the cabins were a business, and the calendar was managed by a booking platform. Both times he said he understood and then brought it up again 3 weeks later. Kim texted me in July 2023 to ask for access to the property management software. Account, the platform I use to manage reservations, guest communications, and pricing. She said she wanted to help me build out the listing descriptions because her social media work meant she was good with content and presentation. I thought about it for a week. I asked Travis what he thought. Travis said it would be helpful to have Kim as backup in case something ever needed handling when I wasn't reachable. He made it sound practical. I added Kim as a secondary user with read-only access in August 2023. That was my mistake, I'll own it. By October, Kim's platform had 3 posts featuring the cabins. The posts showed the creek, the porch, the dock, my dock, the one Patsy and I built, with captions about family property and the best-kept secret in Walker County. She tagged the location as Coffman Creek Cabins, Walker County, GA. The posts had good engagement. Kim was pleased. She mentioned to Travis that the cabins could be a brand partnership opportunity for her account. She mentioned it to me once, lightly, at a Sunday dinner. She said she was thinking about hosting a wellness weekend for small groups at the property. I said, "That's not what the cabins are for." She smiled and said she understood. She brought it up again 2 months later, in a text framed as a question rather than a proposal. Memory object second appearance. Kim mentions that beautiful cross-stitch in cabin 1 in a text, asking if Dale knows who does custom needlework. She is asking about replacing it with something she could use for content. Dale does not respond to that part of the text. In December 2023, Kim used her account access to block out the first week of March on all 3 cabins under the label Holloway Family Stay. She did not ask me. She did not tell me. I found out when a family from Chattanooga, the Pattersons, celebrating their 30th anniversary, tried to book, and the system showed no availability. The Pattersons had found Coffman Creek Cabins through a referral from a guest who had stayed in October. They had been planning the trip for 3 months. When they couldn't book online, they called the contact number on the listing. That number routes to me. Mrs. Patterson was polite, but clearly disappointed. She explained what they were celebrating and asked if there was any flexibility in the first week of March. I pulled up my calendar and saw the block. I told her I would call her back. I sat with my phone for about 10 minutes looking at that blocked week in March. Then I called Kim and asked who had put that hold on the calendar. She said she had. She said it was a good time for the family to come down, because the rates were lower and she had already talked to Travis about it. She said it in the tone of someone explaining something self-evident. I asked her if she had asked me before she blocked the week. She said she knew I'd be fine with it. I asked her to remove the block. She said she'd check with Travis first. The Pattersons lost their first choice week. I gave them a discount on the following week as an apology. The difference came out of my pocket. $340 times 3 cabins, 3 nights. More than $1,000. I called Travis that evening and told him what happened. He said he hadn't realized Kim had gone ahead and done it. He said she was trying to help. He said it wouldn't happen again. It happened again. My neighbor on the creek road is a man named Roy Hendricks. He's 62, spent 28 years as a deputy with the Walker County Sheriff's Office, retired the previous spring. He has a property 3 lots, north of mine, keeps a garden that wins things at the county fair, and has the quality of noticing details that law enforcement careers either create or they grind out. Roy had noticed details. He and I had the kind of neighbor relationship that people in Walker County understand without needing to describe it. We waved from trucks. We helped each other with things that needed 2 people. When I was building the dock during the summer of 2021, and I needed someone to hold the other end of a 16-foot ledger board while I positioned it, Roy was the person I called. He came over without asking what it was for. He held the board. He went home without staying for a beer because he could see I needed to keep working while the light was good. That kind of neighbor. He stopped by on a Tuesday evening in February 2024 while I was doing maintenance on the gravel drive. He asked how the cabins were doing. I said well enough. He leaned on his truck and looked at the creek for a minute. Then he said, "You see anything filed on your property lately?" I said, "What kind of anything?" He said, "Walk application, right-of-way inquiry, access easement." I set down my rake. He had been to the county records office the week prior for an unrelated matter. While there, he saw a preliminary inquiry filed on the creek access point adjacent to my property. The inquiry was not a formal easement application, not yet. It was an inquiry about the process. The name on the inquiry was Roger T. Holloway, Dalton, Georgia. I stood in my driveway for a moment. Roy said, "I don't know what his intention is, but it's worth knowing about." I said, "Yes, it is." I called my attorney the next morning. His name is Gary Pittman. He's been handling my property matters since 2016. He drives a 12-year-old Chevy Silverado that he swears is in better shape than any new truck on the lot, and he has never once been late to an appointment I've made with him. Gary pulled the inquiry. He explained it to me in plain terms. What Roger had filed was an inquiry about establishing a recreational easement, specifically right-of-way access to the creek through my property's creek frontage. Not a formal filing, an inquiry, a first step, something you do before the actual application if you're not sure the process will work. Gary said, "This doesn't have legal standing yet, but it tells you what he's thinking." I said, "Yes, it does." Gary said, "If he files the actual application, we respond. Your chain of title is clean and uncontested. No prescriptive right has been established. There's no documented regular use by any prior party. This would not succeed." I said, "I want to know the moment it moves from inquiry to application." Gary said he'd set up an alert. I drove home from Gary's office and sat in my truck in the driveway for a while. The creek was loud that day. It was late February. The level was up, and you could hear it from the road without trying. I thought about what it means when the father of your son's wife files legal paperwork against your property. Not a mistake. Not a miscommunication. A deliberate, documented attempt to claim legal access to something he has no right to claim. Then I thought about Kim and the booking system. Then I went inside and started making a list. I need to tell you about the specific afternoon I described in the hook, because it came before the booking system incident and before the easement inquiry, and it was actually the first thing that made me understand that this was not carelessness. This was the last weekend of October 2023. Travis and Kim had come down for the weekend. The cabins were not booked that weekend. I had blocked it for maintenance work. Travis helped me fix a drain issue in cabin 3. That was a good afternoon. We worked side by side for 3 hours. I was reminded of who my son is when no one is pulling him in a direction. Kim spent most of Saturday doing what she called content planning, walking the property with her phone, taking photos, making notes. I didn't love it, but I didn't say anything because Travis had asked me to try to find common ground with her. On Saturday evening, after dinner, Kim said she needed to check the guest supplies in cabin 1 and went in alone. She was in there for about 15 minutes. When she came back out, she was smooth, easy conversation, interested questions about Travis's childhood at the Mill Road house, the kind of attention she paid when she wanted to make a good impression. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay there at 2 a.m. listening to the creek and thinking about nothing specific. Around 3:30, I got up and walked to cabin 1. I don't fully know why. Old habit maybe, checking things. The cross stitch was gone. The nail was still in the wall. The area above the kitchen table where the morning light hits first where Patsy had pointed was empty. I opened the storage closet. There it was, face down in a cardboard box. The pine frame had a small scuff along the edge that had not been there when I'd cleaned the cabins 2 weeks earlier. I stood there for a moment with the frame in my hands. I put it back on the wall, went back to the main cabin, sat at the kitchen table until it was light enough outside to see the creek. In the morning I made coffee and waited. Travis and Kim came over at 8. I did not say anything about the cross-stitch. I watched Kim's eyes go to the wall when she came in the door. She looked at it for half a second. Then she looked at me. I looked back at her with no expression. She made pleasant conversation for the rest of the morning. They left after lunch. I called Travis 2 days later and asked him what Kim had thought she was doing with Patsy's cross-stitch. He said he didn't know anything about that. He said it in a way that didn't have the weight of a lie, but didn't have the weight of complete honesty either. It was the voice of a man who might not know but has not been asking the right questions. I said, "Tell her it stays where Patsy put it. That is not a decoration. That is the last thing Patsy made in this world that her hands touched." He said, "I will." I said, "Travis." He said, "I heard you, Dad. It stayed on the wall through that winter." Come spring, Kim's account access was still active. I hadn't revoked it yet. That was about to change. The Memorial Day weekend had been fully booked since January. Cabin 1. The Henderson family from Knoxville. Anniversary trip. 3 nights. $1,020. Confirmed. Cabin 2. 2 couples from Atlanta. Weekend birthday celebration. 3 nights. $1,020. Confirmed. Cabin 3. A solo traveler named Marcus Webb who had stayed with us twice before and booked early every year. 3 nights. $1,020. Confirmed. Total. $3,060 confirmed revenue for the holiday weekend, plus 2 extra days, on either side that were booking up. My strongest weekend of the year. On the 28th of February 2024, I opened the booking platform to answer a message from the Henderson family about parking arrangements. Every cabin showed as blocked. The block label read, Holloway Family Reunion Memorial Day Weekend. All 3 cabins. Thursday through Tuesday. 6 nights. The block was created under Kim's user account. Timestamp, February 24th. The previous Sunday. I stared at that for a long time. Then I looked at the guest communications tab. Kim had sent cancellation notices to all 3 confirmed guests. The notices came from the property's official email address. She had access to that too, through the management portal. The Henderson family had received their cancellation with a note saying, due to owner circumstances, the property will not be available. The Atlanta couples had received similar language. Marcus Webb, who had stayed twice and left 5-star reviews both times, had received a cancellation with no explanation at all. I picked up the phone and called the Hendersons first. They had already booked a different cabin in Tennessee. The husband was polite, but his voice had the particular flatness of someone who was being more polite than the situation deserves. I told him the cancellation had been made without my knowledge or authorization. He said he appreciated that and that they would look forward to returning another time. I do not believe they will return. I called Marcus Webb next. He answered on the second ring. When I explained what had happened, he said, "Dale, this is not on you. This is the kind of thing that happens. I'll book again when the calendar opens up." I said, "I'm going to give you a complimentary stay the next time you're here." He said that wasn't necessary. I told him it was necessary to me. The Atlanta couples had already disputed the cancellation with their credit card company. I closed all 3 confirmed bookings without penalty to the guests. I processed a $1,200 refund to the Henderson family for their trouble. That came out of my account directly. Then I revoked Kim's access to the booking platform. I called Gary Pittman and told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know what unauthorized access to a computer system used for commercial purposes is called in Georgia?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you want to file a report?" I said, "Not yet, but I want it documented." He said, "I'll put it together. You keep everything, the timestamps, the emails, the cancellation notices. Don't delete anything." I said, "I know how to keep records." Then I called Roy Hendricks. I told him what had happened with the booking system and what Gary had told me, and about the easement inquiry. Roy listened. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Dale, these aren't separate things." I said, "I know." Roy said, "You need to get ahead of Memorial Day." I said, "I already am." What I did in the 3 weeks before Memorial Day. First, I changed all the lock codes on all 3 cabins. New codes known to me, to my property manager Lena Garrett, and to no one else. I also changed the alarm system PIN and removed the secondary emergency contact phone number that Travis had put in when we set up the system together. I did not tell Travis I was doing this. He would find out later, during our conversation at the Waffle House, and he would not argue with it. Second, I had Gary send a formal cease and desist letter to Roger Holloway regarding the easement inquiry, advising that any formal application would be contested and citing the clean chain of title and the absence of any established prescriptive right. Gary's letter was 4 paragraphs and cost me $450 in legal fees, worth every cent. Third, I sent messages to the 3 displaced Memorial Day guests, the Hendersons, the Atlanta couples, and Marcus Webb apologizing individually and offering compensation. The Hendersons were already rebooked elsewhere. They thanked me and said they understood. The Atlanta couples had filed a credit card dispute, which I did not contest. Marcus, as I said, was gracious. The total financial damage from Kim's unauthorized actions: $3,060 in lost confirmed bookings, $1,200 in refunds I processed voluntarily. The Atlanta couple's dispute cost me another $680. Total, $4,940 in direct losses from one weekend that she blocked without asking. I wrote that number down. I keep it in the folder with the timestamp screenshots and the cancellation notices, not for a lawsuit, for myself. So I know exactly what patience cost me at its most expensive. Fourth, I called Travis. This was the call I had been putting off. I drove to Chattanooga on a Wednesday afternoon and met Travis at a Waffle House near his office. He was surprised to see me. I told him I was going to tell him something. And then after I told him, whatever he decided to do with it was his decision. But I needed him to know the whole picture. I told him about the cross-stitch. I told him about the booking system cancellations. I told him about the $1,200 refund I'd paid out of my own pocket for a cancellation his wife had made without my knowledge. I told him about the easement inquiry his father-in-law had filed. I told him about the timestamps, the communications, the guests who would not likely return. Travis sat across the table and listened to all of it. When I finished, he put his coffee down. He said, "I didn't know about the easement." I said, "I believe you." He said, "I knew about the booking hold. Kim told me she was going to suggest it to you. She told me she'd reached out to ask." I said, "She did not reach out to ask." He looked at the table. I said, "Travis, your mother built those cabins with me. She made the cross-stitch in cabin 1 while she was on oxygen. Kim moved it to a cardboard box in the storage closet because she wanted better photos for her platform. I need you to understand what that is." He didn't say anything. I said, "I'm not asking you to choose sides. I'm asking you to see what's happening. What you do with that is yours." He said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I said, "I know." He said, "What are you going to do about Memorial Day?" I said, "I'm going to be at the property. Roy is going to be nearby. The booking system shows no reservation for the Holloways because there is no reservation. The cabins are locked. Nobody is getting in without my say-so." Travis stared at his coffee. He said, "Roger is already telling people they're coming. He invited 3 people from his old office." I looked at him. He said, "He's been telling his former colleagues he co-owns the property. He's been saying it for almost a year." I said, "Then this weekend is going to be educational for all of them." The Holloways arrived at 11:23 inches the morning on the Thursday before Memorial Day. I know the exact time because my camera app logged the motion alert from the main drive entrance. 23 people. I counted the vehicles: 4 trucks, 2 SUVs, a minivan with North Georgia plates, and a travel trailer that someone had tried to pull down my gravel drive and stopped when the trailer swayed on the grade. They'd left it at the turn-in. Roger's truck was in the lead. He had 2 men in the cab with him. Older men, business casual dressed, the way former colleagues dress when they're going somewhere semi-recreational. The people Travis had warned me about. Roger was showing them the property. I was on the front porch of the main structure when they turned in. Roy was parked on the far side of the access road, visible, not obtrusive. Lena Garrett, my property manager, was inside with the master key in her pocket. Roger stepped out of his truck and looked at the cabins. He looked satisfied. He always looked satisfied when he was about to present something that reflected well on him. Then he walked toward cabin 1. He tried the door handle. Locked. He tried it again. Tried the keypad. Entered something. Nothing. He moved to cabin 2. Same thing. Then cabin 3. He turned and looked toward the main structure. Saw me on the porch. He smiled not because he was pleased, but because he was a man who always smiled when he was buying time to figure out what was happening. He walked up to the porch. His 2 colleagues were following a little behind, watching. He said, "Dale, codes must have changed. What are we working with?" I said, "The cabins are locked, Roger." He said, "Right, yeah, what's the new code?" I said, "There's no reservation for you or your family this weekend." He looked at me. His smile stayed on, but it was doing more work now. He said, "Kim arranged all of this months ago." I said, Kim blocked the calendar without asking me. I removed the block. The confirmed guests whose reservations she canceled received refunds at my expense. There's no authorization for a Holloway family gathering at this property this weekend or any other weekend. Roger's smile went away. He said, "Now wait a minute," Travis said. I said, "I spoke to Travis 3 weeks ago. He knows everything I just told you." One of Roger's colleagues, the shorter of the two, with the expression of a man who is realizing he is standing in the wrong place, said quietly, "Roger, maybe we should." Roger said, "Hold on." He looked at me. "Dale, I have 23 people who drove up to 2 hours to be here. I have family from Dalton and 2 men I've worked with for 15 years. You are going to tell me they need to turn around and go home?" I said, "Yes," he said. "After everything Kim did to help you build this listing out, all the content she..." I said, "Roger, stop." He stopped. Not because I raised my voice. I did not raise my voice. He stopped because I used the tone that 34 years of working with men who didn't want to do what needed to be done had given me. The tone that says, "This conversation is over." I said, "Kim accessed my booking system without authorization and canceled confirmed reservations from paying guests. Your son-in-law's name is on a preliminary easement inquiry against this property that your family has. No legal basis to file. I have a cease and desist letter from my attorney that was sent to you 3 weeks ago, so I know you received it. What's happening right now is not a misunderstanding. This is a boundary, and you are on the wrong side of it." Roger's colleague looked at Roger. Roger's jaw moved. He had the expression of a man who has been confident in a room for 30 years and is experiencing the specific disorientation of being wrong in front of people he wanted to impress. He said, "I don't think you understand what family means." I said, "I built this property with my wife while she was dying. She made the cross-stitch that's hanging in cabin 1 with her own hands, on oxygen. Your daughter put it in a cardboard box in a storage closet. I think I understand what family means." Roy stepped out of his vehicle and walked slowly toward the drive. Not aggressive, not fast, just present. He had the easy movement of a man who has done this professionally for 28 years. Roger looked at Roy, then looked at me. He said, "We're done here?" I said, "You're done here." He said, "Travis is going to hear about this." I said, "Travis already heard about it." Roger turned and walked back to his truck. The 2 colleagues followed. The whole caravan sorted itself out over the next 15 minutes. I watched from the porch. Lena stood in the doorway, behind me, quiet. The travel trailer backed out first. It caught the edge of the gravel berm, and I thought for a moment it was going to drop a wheel. It didn't. Then the minivan. Then the SUVs. Roger's truck last. He didn't look at me when he drove past. The caravan turned out onto the county road and was gone. The creek was loud. It was always loud in the last week of May. Roy walked up and stood beside me on the porch for a moment. He didn't say anything. He was good at that, knowing when a situation needed words and when it didn't. After a minute, he said, "That went about as well as it could." I said, "Roger is going to tell people I ambushed him." Roy said, "What you did was stand on your own property. He can frame it however he wants." I said, "His colleagues drove up here to see a property he told them he invested in." Roy looked at the empty drive. He said, "Yeah, I imagine the drive back to Dalton is going to be a quiet one." He drove home. Lena locked up the office building. I stood on the porch alone for another 20 minutes. The half-finished birdhouse was on the workbench in the equipment shed, same as always. I looked at it through the shed window from where I stood. I had started it in August 2020, the weekend Patsy got her diagnosis. We had been building it together. She was doing the floorboards. I was fitting the roof supports. Her phone rang mid-afternoon. She answered it. I knew from the way she walked away from the workbench, slowly, facing the creek, that the news was the kind that makes everything stop making the same kind of sense it made before the call. I haven't finished the birdhouse. I haven't thrown it away. It just sits there with the roof supports half in and a pile of small boards beside it on the bench. Some days I walk past it and don't think about it. Some days it's the first thing I see when I open the shed door. Memory object, third appearance. After the last vehicle leaves, Dale walks to cabin 1, unlocks the door, stands in front of the cross-stitch. The morning light is past, but the east wall is still bright. He stands there for a minute. He doesn't say anything. Then he locks the cabin back up and walks to the white oak bench at the end of the dock. He sits on it, This is the first time he has ever sat on it. The water moves over the limestone the way it always does. The family group chat exploded within 30 minutes of the caravan leaving. I was not in the family group chat. Travis was. He told me about it later. Not the specific messages, but the shape of it. Roger had posted his version. Kim had posted her version. Several Holloway relatives had weighed in. The word ambush appeared. The word cruel appeared. The word embarrassed appeared 17 times, according to Travis, which tells you what Roger was actually upset about. Some of the Holloway relatives Roger had brought along, the ones who had driven 2 hours for this, called Travis directly to ask what had happened. Travis told me he answered their calls honestly. He told them his father had not approved the gathering, that the reservations had been made without authorization, and that the legal matter Gary had addressed was real and serious. He said 2 of them thanked him for explaining it. He said they'd had no idea. They had trusted Roger's version, which was the natural thing to do when someone you know well tells you something with confidence. That's how stories get traction, when the person telling them is comfortable in rooms. One relative, a cousin of Kim's named Donna, who had driven from Rome, Georgia, texted me directly 2 days after Memorial Day. She said she was sorry for her part in coming, that she hadn't known the situation, and that she wanted me to know she thought my property was beautiful. She said she'd heard about Patsy and that she thought what I'd built was meaningful. I sent her back 2 sentences. I thanked her for reaching out and told her she was welcome to book through the platform anytime she wanted to visit. She booked a weekend in August. She left a 5-star review. She said in the review that the cross-stitch in cabin 1 made her cry, in the best way. She said she understood why someone would want to come back to a place like this. Kim sent me a text directly at 2:47 p.m. It was 4 paragraphs long. She talked about how much she had invested in the property's success. She talked about her content work and her platform reach. She talked about family loyalty and what it meant to her. She said she hoped I understood how much she cared about Travis and about making things work. I read it once, saved it, did not respond. Roger sent me an email 2 days later. It had a tone that started wounded and shifted to threatening in the 3rd paragraph. He mentioned attorney fees. He mentioned damages. He mentioned that his name was known in this county. Gary Pittman responded to that email on my behalf. Gary's response was 4 sentences. The last sentence referenced the computer fraud documentation I had asked Gary to preserve. Roger did not send another email. Travis called me on Saturday afternoon, 2 days after Memorial Day. His voice had the weight of a man who has spent 48 hours figuring out what he actually thinks about something. He said, "Dad, I should have said something sooner." I said, "Yeah." He said, "I knew Kim had changed some of the booking stuff. I thought she'd talk to you about it. I told myself I thought that because I didn't want it to be what it was." I said, "I know." He said, "The easement thing, I didn't know about that until you told me. I want you to know that." Roger didn't tell me. I said, "I believe you." Long pause. Then he said, "How do we fix this?" I said, "I don't know yet. Some of it might not fix." He said, "Are you angry at me?" I thought about that for a moment. I said, "I'm disappointed that you let it go as long as you did. That's different from angry." He said, "Okay." I said, "Come out some Saturday this summer. Help me fix the drain in cabin 3 that we never finished. We'll see where we are." He said, "Okay, yeah, I'll do that." He came 3 weeks later. We fixed the drain. We had lunch on the deck. He talked about his job, about a road trip he and Kim were planning, about small things. He didn't bring up Roger or the cabins or any of it, and neither did I. I don't know what's happening between Travis and Kim. I've decided it's not mine to know yet. The Hendersons did not rebook. That is the honest cost. Marcus Webb booked a 3-night stay in July. He brought his daughter. She was 9 years old and she stood at the edge of the creek for 20 minutes watching the water move over the limestone before she said a single word about anything. Some things you lose. Some things you keep. That's about right. I want to be straight with you about what I'm not certain of. I am certain that I did what needed to be done. The property is clean, legally, administratively, in every way I can document. The easement inquiry never became an application. The computer fraud documentation sits in Gary's file in case it's ever needed. Kim does not have access to my booking system. The cross-stitch is on the east wall of cabin 1 where Patsy said to put it. Nobody is going to move it again. That part is settled and I sleep fine about it. What I'm less certain about, I gave Kim booking platform access in August 2023. I did it because Travis asked me to, and I wanted to find common ground. I knew by October that something wasn't right. The cross-stitch told me. And I waited another 7 months before I drew the line I should have drawn in October. During those 7 months, she canceled paying guests' reservations. She cost me the Hendersons. She cost me 11 months of Roger telling his insurance colleagues he co-owned something he built nothing of and earned nothing of. That story spread. I don't know how far. I waited because confronting it earlier would have required a harder conversation with Travis before he was ready for it. I made a choice to protect the relationship short term, and it cost me real money and real guests. I'm not sure that was the right call. I'm not sure it was wrong either. I know it's mine to sit with. I also waited because, if I'm being fully honest, I didn't want to be the kind of man who couldn't work things out with his son's wife. I'd watched other men in my life use stubbornness as a weapon and lose everything important. In the process, I didn't want that to be me. I wanted to find a way through. The problem is that finding a way through requires two people who are trying to find a way through. Kim was not trying. She was advancing. And I kept responding to what I wanted the situation to be rather than what it was. That's 7 months I won't get back. 11 months of a lie circulating through Roger's network. The Hendersons, who deserved better. The cost of $1,000 I absorbed without saying anything. All of those things are the cost of patience that stayed past its useful date. The other thing I want to say, Roger Holloway is not a monster. I've said that and I mean it. He's a man who grew up watching his father share everything he had, with family and extended family, who watched that work for 30 years and then moved through the world expecting the same rules to apply. He genuinely believed that if his daughter married into a family with something, the family should share it. He genuinely believed he was being inclusive, not extractive. He was wrong about whose rules he was living by. He was wrong about what he was owed and wrong about how he went about it. But he wasn't wrong about the value of family. He was wrong about what gives you access to it. Kim is 29 years old. She watched her father's version of generosity her whole life and never had a reason to question it until now. She has a question to answer about that. It's hers to answer. Whether Travis is in the room when she answers it, I don't know. That's between them. What I know is this. Patsy drove out to those cabins in November 2021, 8 months before she died, to see the finished walls of cabin 2. I had a portable heater running because it was cold and she didn't have the kind of reserves she used to have. She stood in the doorway and looked at the kitchen counter, the window above it, the view of the creek through the glass. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "Dale, people are going to come here and breathe." She didn't mean breathe literally, though she was thinking about her oxygen by then. She meant they were going to come here and slow down and be quiet, and remember that they could be a person instead of just a function. That was the point of it. That was what she was building it for. That's what it still is. 11 months of bookings. 214 guests. People who found Yocana Creek through a listing and drove however far they had to drive because they needed a place where no one was asking them to fix anything. I have not sat on that white oak bench since Memorial Day. I think I will again. I'm just not ready yet. If you've been watching a long time, I appreciate you staying. Drop a comment below and let me know what part of this landed with you. I want to leave you with this. There is a difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves what you have. The difference is not always obvious. Sometimes it takes years to see clearly. And by the time you do, they're already inside your house, inside your booking system, inside your storage closet. The hard truth I carry is this. I knew by October of 2023. The empty nail told me. I stayed polite for 7 more months because staying polite was easier than the alternative. $1,000 in the Henderson family in 11 months, of a lie spreading through Roger's network that was the cost of 7 extra months of politeness. I don't say that to be harsh about it. I say it because I think most people in my position would have done the same thing. We wait because waiting feels like love, or at least like patience, which is a kind of love. We wait because we don't want to be the one who made things hard. We wait because confrontation costs something, and we're already tired from everything else. But there's a point where patience becomes permission. I passed that point by about 7 months. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I also want to tell you this. Losing the Henderson family hurt, not just the money. They had been planning that trip for months. They had a reason for being there. They drove up ready to be somewhere that mattered to them and found themselves turned away by someone who had no right to turn them away. That happened because I waited. I don't know where they ended up that Memorial Day. I hope it was good. I hope it was worth the drive. I wrote them a note, a real one, handwritten, mailed to their address in Knoxville, and told them I was sorry, and that, if they ever wanted to come back, the stay would be on me. I don't know if they'll take me up on it. But I needed to say it. Some costs you absorb, some costs you carry. That one I carry. If you're in the middle of something like this, if you have people in your life who have decided that what you built is theirs by proximity, I want to tell you one thing. The locked door doesn't have to be angry. It doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be real. Patsy's cross-stitch is still on the east wall of cabin 1. The creek still runs the same way it always has. Marcus Webb is booked again for September with his daughter. She's the one who stood at the edge of the creek for 20 minutes, just watching the water before she said anything. I think Patsy would have liked that kid. I haven't finished the birdhouse in the equipment shed. Maybe I will this fall. Maybe I'll leave it the way it is. Some things you hold on to not because you're stuck, because they're worth holding. Tell me in the comments, was I too patient for too long or did the timing matter? Drop your verdict. I want to read everyone. And if you know someone watching their hard work get treated like everyone else's inheritance, send this to them, not generally. Think of that specific person. They need to know they're not alone.